Many of you have requested some further information about Selma Olafson, who is a very dear friend of mine for many, many years and who was a great contributor to my life as a teenager. So I've tried to remember some incidents, and of course they're just casual and they're just some thoughts that come to mind. But as I remember her, I only met her when she came to the United States. And she came over here at the age of about 18 without any money and for whatever motives I'm not aware. And having no place to go, she found some kind of a rooming house in the Bronx or something. And during the first week, she was up there and had run out of money and was hungry and didn't know where to go for a job. She looked in the paper, and at that point, my grandfather, Joseph Parker Curlin, who was the head of a legal firm in New York and who had a large estate on Long Island, was desperately looking for a nurse to take care of a new member of the family. His daughter, my mother, had just married my father, who had lost his wife, first wife and child in the flu epidemic. So this young man didn't have a mother for a while. I'm not sure of where he lived even, but I know he had a nurse and probably stayed with the family of that his mother had. But what they had moved, my father and mother, after their marriage, into the house there on Long Island, and they desperately needed a nurse for this boy whose name was Cletus. He was about 5 or 6 at the time, and would be classified, at least in those days, as somewhat unmanageable. And so Grandpa had put this advertisement in the paper, inviting people to offer to fulfill this position. So she saw this and she decided, well, she had enough money to get there on the train, and so she went and made a good impression on my grandfather. And then he introduced her to Cletus. So Cletus wasn't too interested in authority at that time and said, if you give me any trouble, I'll kick you right in the shins. And she said, I'll kick you right back. Well, that impressed him. And she was hired. And they actually became great friends. And she really became a friend of every member of the family. I don't remember how many years she was in that service, but I know whenever the woman who was the nurse for the other children, who came one by one, till there were 4 of us altogether, she used to come and fill in for her on vacations. So she had this extraordinary quality. I don't know how you would otherwise describe it. But she was always cheerful and always friendly and always loving, and she rarely criticized anybody. If she did, there was certainly good reason for it. But she really wanted to make everybody happy, and so she had this unusual quality and that she expressed often that it was important to try to understand other people. And so she tried so hard to understand you, including your faults, that if she didn't, really understand you, it was as good as if she did. So that you felt that someone was trying to understand the situation. At one point, she was, all the kids were at the beach or something, and I was about 2 or 3, and this is her story. She said she took me out to teach me how to swim, and had this head of hair that was quite long. And a wave came along, and I was submerged. Oh, she was so worried that I might have swallowed some water, and so she pulled me out of the briny deep and said, "How are you? How are you?" And according to her, I said, "Oh, Selma, my feathers have gotten all wet." So apparently I had identified hair as feathers, but remember, I'm only 2 or 3 years old at this point. But she never forgot that incident. Later on, as I moved into adolescence, she had married another gentleman from Iceland, who I think was living in this country. And he unfortunately had some emotional problems and an alcohol problem. So he was not reliable in keeping a job. So by that time, she had left the service in order to move in with him, and they had this continuing difficulty. She really was supporting the family, and because of her wonderful personality, she got good jobs in certain upscale department stores or ladies' gowns on 59th Street. So I used to see her once in a while on a weekend if I was in New York, and she was always a great support and friend, and always patient and encouraging. At one point, I tried to write a book. I think I was 15 or something, and she managed to get the publisher of a friend of hers, the husband of a friend of hers, and she was so excited when he said, "Oh, it was good. This young man will probably be able to get his name on a book and by the time he's 21," and so on. So at that point, I had been thinking of being a writer. I was in boarding school at the time. But then came some religious experiences in my life. At about 17, I had a very strong attraction to follow the gospel, and that shook up my life and pretty much that of the family, who didn't, and of course, understand what I was doing. She was not a Catholic at this point, so she was trying so hard to understand what I was going through and to support me. So it was that constant love and presence. She was always there, and she always enjoyed going out for a cup of coffee or have a lunch at Child's Restaurant, I think it was functioning at that time, where we had a friend who was a waitress that used to serve us. But everybody loved her at this place where she worked. The doorman, I used to sometimes talk with him while waiting for her to come down. But she was also a very popular sales lady and quite successful, and met a number of significant people in the politics and entertainment world who came in there for a fancy dress their purposes. I used to share with her some of the books I was reading, and as a result of that, over the years, she became a Catholic and took instruction from a nun in Queens, where she lived. Meanwhile, her husband's health and alcohol problem was deteriorating, and he wasn't pleased with her becoming a Catholic. And I remember when she received her first communion, I bought a little statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary at a kind of Catholic 5 and 10 cent store, which she put on the mantelpiece, in which I remember she told me he had put some flowers in front of it or put it in a prominent place or something. A few months later, he had to be hospitalized, and he was dying in the hospital there. It's on an island in the middle of the East River, underneath the Queensbury Bridge in those days. And she was visiting him after working all day, and we used to attend on Friday nights a holy hour at St. John the Baptist Church on 76th Street. And one night she called and said he was very sick. She couldn't come, and when she went back to the hospital, he had died. But she had made friends with the doctor, as she usually did with everybody she ran into. And it seems that the priest who was chaplain there, had visited him and asked him if he'd like to say the Our Father together. And he did, and then he gave him communion. So she was able to bury him in the Catholic cemetery, which meant a great deal to her. I always thought perhaps the reason he had such a grace of dying in such should we say, happy circumstances, was that little gesture he made of moving an artificial flower plant in front of the statue of Our Lady. It doesn't take much apparently to impress God or to please him, but so she was very strengthened in her faith by that set of circumstances, because she originally had thought he had died without any religious persuasion. So that really was another source of bringing us together at a deeper level. So we continued to share the books I was reading, some of them anyway. When I came down from Yale and later when I was at Fordham, I used to see her at the Friday night holy hour at St. John the Baptist. So my vocation continued to unfold, and so I wanted to when I graduated from Fordham, I wanted to enter the monastery right away. So I made plans to do so. I couldn't enter earlier because you had to have permission from parents, which was not forthcoming. But she was always extremely supportive. Now, I was fully aware that I was an important person in her life, and although she had a great friendship with other members of the family and any number of other people, she had a special love for me. So, and that was kind of cemented by our religious companionship and by her sharing in my thoughts and the evolution of my obstacles that I had to overcome and so on. So it came time, she came to my graduation in the Bronx, and then a few days later I had planned to leave to go to the monastery. And we had a final meeting over coffee and tea, and that was extremely poignant because I knew I may never see her again. I knew that my going was causing her great suffering. But she never said a word about that, and she was just plain supportive, understanding, and didn't question my decision, while everybody else was really doing so. Trappists were not well known in that day. Father Merton hadn't started writing, and my poor father, who couldn't understand it at all, thought I was entering a tomb and wasting all the funds he had spent on really a very good education. So I said goodbye to other people, and then I went to the Grand Central Station. There she was. She had come to say a second goodbye. And so I understood what she was feeling, and I understood fully, that I was the cause of this pain. It couldn't have been a more difficult moment for me, because am I going to go through this twice? was the question in my mind. And so I didn't speak to her. I didn't ask her, why did you come again? Though those things were not part of the equation. She just wanted to see me, I guess, one last time. So after a loving embrace, I disappeared onto the train, and I never expected to see her again, because in those days the Trappists usually didn't have their friends visiting, and their parents was limited and so on. So you could only write a letter to your folks in those days, and so I didn't have that chance to share with her. But she continued her friendship with others. She continued to teach her catechism in Lower Harlem, where I had been teaching it. But later on she had to give that up because the neighborhood became so dangerous. So as it happened, my life started to change in the monastery, and after about 15 years, I was sent to Colorado here, and in passing through New York, I visited my family, and they had invited her to come say hello. So that was a beautiful reunion, and there were other occasions when I met her, as I had to travel more frequently as abbot of Spencer. She continued to live in a fairly moderate place. She had made good friends with the landlady there, but she was pretty much living alone most of the time, and eventually she had to go to a nursing home, where I sometimes visited her when I passed through New York. And there she used to take part in discussions, and she was helpful to the other patients to make sure they had their rights and considerations and so on. And so when she passed away in a hospital, I was in a phase of a long illness, and I couldn't come to the funeral, which was a disappointment for me. But everyone in the family remembers her as their friend. And this was the quality that deeply impressed me and which I tried to imitate, and that is the tireless effort to understand everybody's situation and where they're coming from. And this is something she did eventually just spontaneously. And so everybody just loved her automatically. I'm sure that she has had something to do with the development of centering prayer in Iceland, and will continue to help you folks, since she had many friends and a large family that she left behind when she came first to New York. So I hope these few words will give you a little more idea of what she was like and of our relationship. Thank you.